The main driver of the Lewis and Clark expedition, of course, was Thomas Jefferson.
He had recently persuaded Congress to accept the purchase of a large amount of territory from the French.
They bought a piece of land that they knew nothing about. Their knowledge of it was limited.
What Jefferson's looking for is someone to go out and help lay claim to as much of that Louisiana territory, what would become the Louisiana territory, as possible. And he saw in an individual right across the table from him, a man that he exhibited, as he said, courage undaunted, and Meriwether Lewis.
He wants Lewis to learn how he wants things taken down and recorded. Well, what's Lewis going to do on this journey but record it? In 1803, Lewis is going to do a little tour. He's going to start out in the Harper's Ferry.
The big thing, of course, that Harper's Ferry is going to give them is their largest supply of weapons and also tools that they need to repair their weapons, do other work, and also many of these tools are going to gather can serve as potential trade items or for diplomatic gifts with the various native tribes they encounter.
He invents some things. He goes down there, for example, he says, I know I'm going to run out of river eventually. He's already got in mind what he's going to have is vessels to get upriver, but he knows that rivers play out.
Lewis had this idea for an iron frame collapsible, as he called it, a canoe.
And he creates a collapsible iron boat, a vessel, that he's going to carry all the way to Great Falls, Montana.
He comes to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, about 80-90 miles to the west of Philadelphia, to train with Andrew Ellicott, APS member, at the instructions of Thomas Jefferson.
At the time, Ellicott was probably the most famous surveyor alive. He had helped survey the Canadian border, the Pennsylvania-New York border, spent 4 years surveying Florida, laid out the city of Erie, finished up the plans for Washington, D.C. So if you were going to learn how to survey, you were going to come to the master, and that was going to be Andrew Ellicott.
He makes this little round trip and, of course, ends up in Philadelphia where he gets an education and everything from astronomy to field medicine.
Meriwether Lewis, when he was in Philadelphia, he met with Ellicott and Robert Patterson, but he also met with 3 other APS members who were very important figures in early American science. Caspar Wistar was a medical doctor at the University of Pennsylvania, but he was also an early paleontologist, and he was very interested in very large bones of extinct animals like the mammoth. He also meets with Benjamin Smith Barton, another important figure who's a doctor, but he's also a very famous botanist. So he was the person who helped Lewis understand a lot of the new plants he might find, how to describe them. He taught him how to preserve them. So there was an herbarium that was created during the expedition. Benjamin Rush was the most famous doctor in the United States in 1803. He was a polymath. He had signed the Declaration, very pivotal figure. But he actually talked with Lewis about 2 things: about medicine and the health of his team, but also about ethnography. The 2 of them sat down to figure out the kind of questions that Lewis and the expedition should be asking to the native peoples that they meet across Louisiana territory. What are the acute diseases of Indians? What's their state of longevity? At what age do they marry? What are the provision for their children, especially after they're weaned? What are their vices? Things of that nature. So really trying to get at the cultural sense of the native groups that they know nothing about, the peoples west of the Mississippi.
He has to go back to D.C. I think it's there that, by the way, just a few little particulars, I think it's there that he realizes that, number one, he can't do this trip alone. He needs somebody to go with him. He
goes to D.C. To confer with Jefferson, writes a letter to Clark at that same time and says, I got approved for this expedition. The material is on its way to Pittsburgh, and I want you to join me as co-leader of the expedition, which Clark does accept.
Lewis sets aside a part of his own pride by offering a chance to co-command, and it is co-command an expedition to a man named William Clark, a man who he had served under in the Army prior to the expedition, a man who he saw and had a great deal of respect for, who he knew would help to build a team that was going to be capable of making this trip successful.
One of the most interesting aspects of the whole thing is the sort of co-leadership of the expedition, born of their own desires, and not common to have a hierarchy with people who are seen as being lateral, but certainly a team that was necessary.
This could have very easily been a conversation about the Lewis expedition, but now forever we call it Lewis and Clark. And because of that, I think it's really in many ways unprecedented to imagine that he would share some of the trials and tribulations and the accolades that would come if this expedition was successful.
For more information or to become involved with the Lewis and Clark Trail Alliance, visit lewisandclark.org. To learn more about Shenandoah University and the Shenandoah Center for Immersive Learning, visit su.edu/skill.